Hello everyone. I know we've met all of you in the room here today, but to those of you online on Zoom, nice to meet you or see you, and thanks for attending. So what we're going to do is share with you our experiences designing what Business 103 was. We're going to start by providing a bit of background as to why we were asked to design and implement Business 103. We're going to talk through the instructions from the faculty, the faculty leadership team that asked us to do certain things. We're then going to share our guiding principles, the ideas that we used to kind of inform all of the design decisions that were made. And because it was in semester 2 of 2020, you'll all know that we had to shift online pretty quickly on Zoom because of the COVID alert level 3 and 4 lockdowns. So we were able to kind of adapt our teaching pretty quickly with those guiding principles in mind. We're going to explain what the essence is of Business 103 because it is one of the three Stage 1 core courses. At least in the business code of courses as of 2020. We'll talk through some of the main innovations that we came up with, and we wanted to experiment as much as we possibly could. Because we wanted to actually have some evidence to suggest, to learn from what went well and what didn't go so well, we'll share some of the SET results and also, more importantly, the targeted evaluation feedback that we sought from students to try and inform our learning of what worked well and what didn't. So that's the broad, I guess, agenda for the talk. We've got a timer set here for 30 minutes. We have 40 minutes. We're very, very lucky and grateful to be offered that. Thank you so much, Nadia and Doug, for that. But the intent is to kind of stimulate some discussion. So we'll leave 10 minutes at the end of the session to do that. Yeah. Okay. So I talk through the agenda. Okay, so why did we end up doing Business 103? So, as you all know, we now have Business 111, 112, 113, 114, and I think 115. It's all been recoded and there's an integrated core, which I think is excellent. Doug mentioned before how it's a horizontal core, and soon there'll be a vertical core as well. So in the last year of Business 101 and 102 rollouts, we were asked to design Business 103. Now the idea behind Business 103 was that we were asked by the faculty leadership team to basically come up with a course that targeted students who have some business studies experience in high school. And so we're trying to, I guess we have a normal distribution of abilities and backgrounds in terms of education. We're really, really good at dealing with the masses, so the center of the curve. We're excellent at providing additional support for students that need extra help. We haven't quite done so much for students who have a little bit of experience in the business studies in high school and who may have also performed quite well in the first core course of Business 101. So that's why we were asked to target the course towards students who have some of those experiences. So the idea was that students would be invited to Business 103 and then they would take 103 if they elect to in place of Business 102. That's the broader background to the decision from the faculty leadership team to ask the course to be designed. And I just wanted to re-emphasise how there tends to, kind of sensing there's more of a shift towards skills-based education right now. We've heard our dean talk about that a few times. I've heard other people talk about it in the faculty and outside of the university. So having skills-based courses that are anchored on rigorous academic work, various disciplinary backgrounds, but really helping students get their hands dirty. So that's kind of the background to this. Just so you know, I'm going to fly through this preliminary stuff. Milind and I co-taught the course, so I will step back in a few moments' time and let Milind take over. So, what were our instructions? So the instructions were, and I remember the quote from a couple of the people in the leadership team saying they want the course to be practical and relevant to the real world, and they want it to be exciting. So those 3 points kind of stuck in my mind in terms of the design process. At the outset, there were quite a large number of us involved with it. Things got a bit messy with COVID, so ultimately I ended up being given the opportunity to be course director. Milind came on board at the very last minute. We did a lot of design work in a few weeks to get us up to scratch. And the other instructions from the faculty were to ensure that the content is exactly the same, the academic content is exactly the same as Business 102. So it's meant to be comparable in terms of difficulty, in terms of academic content. So we covered innovation entrepreneurship content, and international business content, management, and some marketing content as well. It had to be the same. And one of the advantages we had was that we have a very close relationship with the 101 and 102 core team, because we've worked with them for a number of years now. So Michelle Kilcolly-Profits, who was the director of 101 and 102 last year, we worked closely with her to ensure that the assessment's difficulty was about the same as 102. And another thing was to, and actually my head of department suggested this very strongly, which was to innovate and collect data on what's working and what was not working so well. Okay, Okay, so the guiding principles we had, we wanted to keep the course simple. We heard Patricia before talk about simplicity in terms of assessment design and Canvas usage. We felt very, very strongly about that. It's easy with a large course to have lots of tabs and lots of instructions, which is very helpful if you know where you're looking, but we wanted to try and strip all of that back and have, I'll go to the second point there, simplicity in course design and clarity in student instructions and Canvas navigation. So we wanted it to, at face value, to not appear to be overwhelming. Once we're in the classroom, once we develop some of the online materials, that's where we'll get to the depth, but we wanted it to be not visually overwhelming at face value. We kind of add value to their learning experiences once we kind of get our hands dirty a little bit. So we wanted to make sure there was depth in academic content. We had the opportunity to share some more professional content with them, given that the students had already learned some of the content in 102 in high school, so we could extend them even further. And we wanted to have a depth of engagement in the course. So they're the guiding principles. So maybe we can share this one now, Milind.
Yeah. So, like Andrew said, the idea was not only talk about business, but we kind of started doing that in 101 and 102 now, where we started to talk about setting a business which could be purely commercial, or setting up business that could be a social enterprise, or somewhere in between. What we actually gave them as an opportunity, literally in the first session itself, is we said we're not going to do a lot of teaching today. In fact, we talk about the business model as a framework and the ideation as a canvas coming from our design thinking learning that I'm doing since last year. So what we ended up doing there is we actually said to them, we're not teaching anything this week. We're going to tell you what the course is and what the assessment setup is and what the breakdown is and what's expected out of you. But more than that, we're going to put you into teams. And then we allowed them to have self-selection of teams to a certain degree. And we said, fine, okay, so this is the team that you're going to work with. You know exactly what a team is from your 101 background. You're coming into 103 now. And we're going to ask you to sit here and think about a real problem and think about a solution of sorts to that real problem. So let's start with that. Let's not give you a sort of fictitious assignment or a written up case study that you keep working through. We actually ask you to say, think about a problem. So they actually were allowed to use their computers and literally Google search, what are the problems people are facing right now? What are the problems that we face in our daily routine? And we said, the problem doesn't have to be a massive, world-changing, world-shattering problem. It could be a simple problem, as I would rather have somebody do this for me. That's a problem. That's a real problem. It's something that you think about every day. It's a problem. So sit together and come back with a list of problems that you think you need to solve. So that's the first thing. That's the ideation process. That's the ideation part of the design thinking process. We actually got them through the first 3 stages of ideation in the first session itself, saying, this is not the end. You will come back with not maybe 1, maybe 2 ideas. As time goes by, we'll keep refining those ideas with you. And that's pretty much what ideation works like. You start with an idea, you go back, you reflect on what happened in the classroom, you read a bit more, you engage with more content, you have a conversation as a team, and you think, oh, maybe we got this wrong. Maybe we were looking at the problem in a different way. So they keep coming back pretty much in the first half of the semester, and they figured it out exactly what the real problem was and what sort of solution they wanted to offer. Some of them ended up being a pure commercially driven, we're going to make money out of this as an idea, and some of them said, no, we don't want to make money. It was a distinction between 2 different streams, and they were happy. We said, we're not judging you. You know, you could do a for-profit or a not-for-profit type work. We're not asking those questions. Tell us what the idea is and tell us how you're going to solve that idea. So as time went by, that's pretty much what started to happen. So they had to get their head around the problem, they had to get their head around solution seeking, and then actually start to solve those problems, and then put them on a piece of paper. And all along that journey, they had to reflect on that experience as well. And that's why we had 2 learning journals that were given to them, saying, what have you learned so far? And then reflect on what have you learned again in the second half of the semester as well. And that kind of sort of became a bridge to saying, my current thinking was in week 2 or week 3 versus my current thinking is in week 9. Is it different? And we've actually said, if it's not different, then you should worry. But if it's different, then we shouldn't worry, because that means you actually learned something new. So that was pretty much the idea. So we was almost like chucking them into that, saying, you're doing this today. Okay, let's get on with it. We're not going to dictate the process, you will run the process yourself. So we would like to do more of that actually. if given the choice.
Yeah, I think it kind of so we were fortunate because Milind was doing a design thinking course I think through Stanford last year at the same time.
We're still doing it.
Yeah, so he was able to actually integrate some of the stuff he was learning on design thinking and the ideation
The
process.
first process of ideation. So you can do ideation to completely deploy a solution to a problem. That's high-level thinking. We did not go that far. That's a 6-stage strategy. I only deliberately picked on the first 3 stages. Keep it simple, only use that as a tool, and deploy the tool for what's required. That's it.
Yeah, and it was an iterative process, and it actually worked out pretty well in the end. So the essence of Business 103, you probably picked up, was that we wanted students to get their hands dirty, have more of a real-life experience, in particular to design their own businesses. So one of the learning outcomes of Business 103 is from startup to international success. So we thought, well, starting up a business, why don't we get them to do their own? Some of them might actually go on to do their own business or social enterprise, and as Milind said before, we didn't make any value judgments on the difference between them as to whether one was better or the other. It turned out that about 50% did social enterprises and 50% did profit enterprises.
And we had 2 different streams that we were teaching on. Yeah. They were independent of each other. In spite of that, half were making money. One of them actually was on the borderline, saying make some money, but at the same time do a bit of social enterprise work as well, which was a hybrid type model that they came up with Nest Eggs as a strategy. So that was quite good, and then they also figured out that we could probably start with this as a solution and then bifurcate that into 2 different organizations, one that makes money and one that does social enterprise type work, which was quite clever. So they did all of that on their own. We were pretty much just saying, so what would you do next now, tell me. And they would keep working through those ideas, and then they'll say, can we do this? I said, what stopped you from doing this? Can you look at other companies that are perhaps doing this right now, which is where the practice readings come in handy. So you've got your academic readings, which is like a framework, particularly the business model canvas, and then we deliberately picked on Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, and McKinsey. And so you get to see what the academic folk are saying, you get to see what the practitioners are saying, and then you start to make those linkages, and then you think, my business idea, and between those 2, what can I do with this? And that's pretty much what the learning was happening, and which was quite enjoyable. I thought personally that we could have pushed them a little bit more, but the other factor that was holding us back is it had to be comparable to 102. We couldn't do more or less than what 102 was already doing.
Yeah, and we'll talk through the assessment structure pretty soon. So that's the essence of what Business 103 was all about. Class delivery, so one of the main differences we had with 102 was that we thought we've got some smart people here and they've done business studies at high school. We're going to work from the assumption that they're quite highly motivated. And we said to them, well, why don't we condense 8 weeks of academic content from 102 into 5 weeks of content delivery in Business 103. So we stripped away 3 weeks of academic content delivery, which meant that we had to double the readings that they had, but in our view, in our sense, in our kind of hopeful guess, that they would be able to manage that, and they were able to. We asked them a survey that, at the end of the week, it was 1 or 2 to see if they'd done the readings, and I think 80% of them had done.
Oh, they ended up doing a lot more reading than what was prescribed to them, so that was the other surprise. They would go and find something which, another practitioner-based article which was related to their industry and the problem that they were solving, and they will bring that back into their writing. Yeah. Which we did not prompt. They were doing it on their own, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I understand. So we had 3 different types of workshop delivery. So we had ones where we talked about academic content in the green. I'll go to the next slide so you can see. The ones in the red was related to assessment, particular to assessment tasks. And in the blue, we had some assigned work time with facilitated consultation. So we wanted them to have some space to actually get some good teamwork actually done. So what we've got up there is just, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but just to give an indication, we didn't mention earlier that we anchored the entire course design in terms of, as an organising framework, we used the business model canvas from Ostwater and Pigneur. We were able to intuitively link the academic content from IB, management, innovation, entrepreneurship, and marketing to each of the 9 building blocks of the business model canvas. So if you just glance over that, you can see intuitive links between, say, value proposition and I&E, innovation, entrepreneurship, ideation, design thinking. Moving on to the marketing content, we have customer segments, customer channels, and the like. So it really does work quite well. There was that distinction, and we made it clear to the students that there's the academic content, there's professional content, there's skills-based content, and then there's cases. Academic content is stuff from like Patterson and TED and the like, from I&E, IB, management, marketing.
The readings that the 1 or 2 folks were doing were already here.
Yeah.
But we obviously were building up by having more practitioner-based readings as well, and case studies.
Yeah.
Because the case study contextualizes what they're looking at.
Yeah, and then the business model canvas is more of it's a professional reading, let's be honest. It's written by about 400 academics, but it's more as a tool to help determine what a business model might actually look like in practice. So we had 3 different types of content deliveries. The most important thing there was that we had 5 weeks of in-class academic discussions. The rest of the time was getting their hands dirty.
And because we were aligned the teams every session to have a brainstorming session within themselves, they were actually solving their own problems, coming up with new problems, and then somebody would answer that problem. And if they needed more help, we would go and sit with them and sort of reframe the problem. And then once you reframe the problem, they would find a solution to that problem anyway. So it was kind of not doing too much teaching either, stepping back, giving them the room to have a conversation and reflect on what they've done so far versus where it needs to go. And then they would come back and say, can we also do this? And I said, what stopped you from doing that? It's not about getting it right, it's about doing something different. And if it doesn't work, you will know it did not work. Why don't you write that in your reflective journal?
Yeah, so we weren't judging them on whether we thought their ideas were interesting or cool or whatever. We were judging them, ultimately evaluating them on their ability to demonstrate that they would be viable and their ability to demonstrate that they understand the content that they can link.
So I think the process was more important of getting to the ultimate solution rather than what the solution was. The solution didn't have to be exciting all the time.
Yeah, so we talked about the readings. We made it clear on a weekly basis what the different types of readings were. Sometimes in the first year, students might not know the difference between an academic reading or a professional periodical reading or whatever it might be. So we said, here are the academic readings, here are the skills ones, here are the professional ones, here are the cases when they're appropriate. And as Milind mentioned, we found contemporary readings from McKinsey & Co. and HBR, normally from around 2019, 2020.
Deliberately new ones.
Yeah, to share with them. That would complement what we'd already taught them and consistent with the theme of making it relevant to the real world, which was one of the guiding principles we mentioned at the start. So the assessment structure, we have a comparison slide coming up to compare it with 102, bearing in mind it is a very different cohort. We had 63 students, they've all done studies of high school and business, and they performed to a reasonably high standard in Business 101. We didn't determine who was in the course, the faculty level sent out invitations. So we had a small group of people, which actually throws up its own set of challenges because they're really smart. Everything you say, they are paying attention to. So you need to make sure you know what you're talking about, and you kind of can't fluff your way through anything. So that was one of the.
I also think that because they'd already done a little bit of business in the school level, they ended up doing well on 101. Because some of the background's already there, and they were basically building it up from 101. So that the trajectory for them is, don't take me to 102 unless it's going to challenge me. Take me to something else. And I think that's where the 103 comes in handy. So we ended up challenging them, and the more we challenged them, the more they put up with it and saying. So we kept thinking, should we challenge them even more? But then we had to make sure that we were not doing more than what was required on 102.
Yeah, challenging them intellectually, but when it came to assessment, it was comparable.
Yes. So the conversations were very challenging in the classroom, and we deliberately would push them. But when it came to assessment, it had to be comparable to 102. So.
Which made it fun, right?
Yeah.
So the assessment structure, we had Milind mentioned before 2 learning journals that we came up with. So the first learning journal was due in week 4. They asked 2 particular questions. The first question was to explain what resonated with you. So choose 3 academic readings from a couple of the weeks. We gave particular weeks. Discuss what most resonated with you and why. So there's more of a kind of a higher order skills question there. And then the next question was, what do you most disagree with and why? So we purposely chose the word disagree with rather than critically analyze or critique, because we wanted to use more kind of digestible language, but then we essentially told them how to.
Without knowing, they were critically analyzing what they were reading and questioning it too.
Yes, and so again, back to that idea of keeping that simplicity in the instructions, using kind of more classic generic English, I guess. So that was week 4, and we were really surprised that they enjoyed it. We thought it would be a bit of a risk, asking students to reflect on an academic reading and what they disagreed with. They really liked it, but what we found, and we gave them extra guidance on this, was you might feel a bit uncomfortable critiquing an academic work, because it's an academic work. You come to university to learn from academics and do all the readings. Who are you, who am I to kind of critique this? But we talked about ways that they could go about doing that, such as challenging methodologies or looking at context, whether there might be some generalizable findings or big claims that might be a little bit too bold, those types of things. So the first one we found they're a little bit tentative with their critiques or what they disagreed with. But by the second one, they were able to improve upon that, so we gave them some good formative feedback in the first one. That's the learning journal. Then we moved to team presentation. Now, that was meant to be in person.
In person, we ended up being, so for us, we were on campus, we ended up on Zoom, and we came back on campus, nothing changed.
Yeah.
For us and for them, nothing changed at all. They were still in their teams, they were still doing the ideation process, carry on, trying to solve the next level of problems, trying to figure out what the process needs to be underneath. That didn't change. Presentations, we ended up doing presentations online, and that was new, except for one student who didn't have a camera. Everyone else had access to camera, so they practiced virtually. Obviously, everyone was sitting home because it was lockdown, and they presented virtually, and then we assist them for the content, but more so, we also assist them measure their performance in terms of presentation online, so they like that too.
Yeah, so a key thing that we did differently in these presentations were that in normal first year presentations in our experience 101, 102, which is an excellent model, they present as a team and they're marked as a team based on the rubric, largely related to academic content and some presentation skills. So we thought, well, it's week 5, they're currently designing their own social enterprise or business enterprise. Why don't we give them a question on 2 components of the business model canvas, so value proposition and customer segments. We'll get them to share that to us in their presentation as a team, but we won't evaluate them on their business or social enterprise ideas. Instead, we'll assess them individually on their presentation skills, which speaks perfectly to the graduate profile in terms of communication skills.
Yeah, so like we never judged them on the idea.
No.
That was their idea. It was completely open-ended.
Yeah.
What we were assessing is what would a student be assessed on the profile.
That's right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, so then it was meant to be in person in week 5. We were going to get in a guest speaker to help them with presentation skills. We were on Zoom, so then in week 4 we ended up getting someone who has experience presenting on television live on the media, so they did a guest session in week 4 to teach them how to present effectively into the camera. And then, as Milind said, we ran them live on Zoom. We didn't just tell them you have to present live on Zoom, we said, is it okay if you present live on Zoom? And they all said that yes, that would be fine, rather than having to do a filming, they wanted to have the real life.
And particularly for that session, people dressed up, even if they're sitting at home.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
They were all wearing shirts and ties and presenting as if they were presenting in the classroom, but they were on their camera sitting at home.
Yeah, and an added thing we did was we got an industry expert, a marketing expert, to provide some feedback on their presentation. So they received formative feedback on the ideas for their business or social enterprise and value proposition and segments. Turned out the marketing expert had worked extensively with the business model canvas and I think value proposition canvas in the past as well. So he provided kind of more critical feedback on their ideas. With a 2-minute question time and discussion after each of the presentations, which were 5 minutes in length. So basically, a great opportunity to put their ideas up there, receive some formative feedback in a safe environment, but then get evaluated according to the graduate profile on their individual presentation skills. We kind of ticked, I guess, knocked 2 minutes off the one.
We did everything that we thought would really help them in one way or another. So completely open-ended. Let's do this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and it was fine.
It worked, yeah.
So then they had a team report. That was due in week 9. The team report was basically their business plan. So what we did was we went to business.gov.nz, we found a business template or a report template. Then we amended that and integrated the instructions for the assignment into the template and highlighted red text. So they had to answer the questions that were in red text, delete what the questions were. Yeah. So we gave them the report template, but we didn't tell them what to write. They needed to figure that out for themselves. Each of the components of the business model canvas, so all 9 building blocks were covered in their reports. They also had 3 specific questions on academic concepts. There were questions around innovation and entrepreneurship, questions on the total product concept from marketing, and a question on leadership as well. And they had to provide an organizational chart, which they had already learned in Business 101. So they covered, it was a whole wraparound approach to what their business or social enterprise idea was. And if we had permission from the students, we would be happy to share what they came up with to anyone who would like to see, because we were impressed. By that 95%.
The quality of work was pretty,
Yeah, so that was what they were working towards for the first 10 weeks of their semester. From that point onwards, we flexed their attention to the exam and summative assessments. And to that end, we provided them with a bespoke case on Rocket Lab, because we wanted it to be, again, a real-world case. So we used information from publicly available sources on Rocket Lab that spoke to their startup, their getting of finance from the various rounds of finance acquisitions from angels, investors, whoever else was involved. And then we came up with, so we gave them the case in advance in about week 8 or 9, it was week 9.
9, yeah.
Yeah, and we spent a week in class talking through what Rocket Lab was all about.
Some of the aspects of their business, yeah.
Yeah, and then we gave them the exam questions on the day. So they knew about the case, they knew about, say, 4 weeks of content that might be covered, and then on the day we gave them the question. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here's a quick comparison, just for Business 102 and Business 103. The main point there is that we've changed 8 weeks of academic content into 5 weeks of Business 103. Rather than having 14 touch points of internal assessment for 102, we had 4 in Business 103. We kind of worked from the assumption that increasingly kind of granular degrees of assessments might induce some heightened degree of anxiety in students. And rather than testing kind of knowledge-based, so like the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, such as knowledge comprehension, we wanted to focus more on the higher end, so analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, which fitted quite well with the cohort that we actually had. But I also like the simplicity of having 4 in depth rather than 14 touch points. I think the multi-choice questions in 1 and 2 are awesome. I personally think that it could be used as a reflective device to see how students are doing rather than having 10% attached to that, but it's a completely different beast when you have 1,700 students to work with. Okay.
Right, so in terms of number of innovations that we did, probably on that slide, starting with, we allowed them to have for-profit or social enterprise. Yeah. For-profit or social enterprise, thanks David. Number 2, we had a framework that they had to work through, all the way through Business Model Canvas, every different component each week, and then they had to bring it together. They had to also start mapping their own business onto the framework so that they knew where the gaps were and how better to solve those problems that they were doing. Ideation, like I said, we took to the first 3 different stages of ideation, starting from day 1 itself, and we would have loved to do more of that, but we had to obviously cover the content that we had with us. In terms of getting sort of external guest speakers to come in and give them feedback, that was really valuable because they were able to ask all sorts of questions. Sometimes we come in as lecturers, but an outsider, they can literally pose any question that they like. And he was pretty good. Actually, both of them were really good because they would say, as a practitioner, this is what I would do. And then so the practitioner's viewpoint, they had practitioner-based meetings. We obviously had a practitioner-based viewpoint in those conversations. We also created a collaborative space on Canvas for each of the teams, and they were asked to use that same space. We didn't have to, but we asked them to use that space. The reason for that, because they were writing the reflective journal. You actually had all those entries for each week and everything that you were doing as a team in exercises. And then you could go back and just capture that in your reflective journal number 2. So, and we could see what they were doing. So we had a bit of insight into what the teams were doing and where they were going. And basically, one of the other tools that work really well, and Andrew used to do that, is in 101 or 111 and 112, we have learning summaries in the end for each week. Instead of having a learning summary as one single piece of paper, we actually had audio learning summaries. So we would do a podcast style learning summary. This week we did this and talk about the main issues, record it and put it on Canvas. And then they would listen to it multiple times. And there was probably their preferred way of learning as well. Yeah. So that was sort of, within the space that we had, we tried to do all sorts of different things that we possibly could without losing the sense of what we're doing here.
Yeah, and we told them about that too. We said, look, this is new. We hope it runs again. Please give us as much feedback as you can and let us know if you have some ideas. Yeah. Again, the beauty of having a smaller cohort, so that actually worked quite well. Just a quick point of clarification, the collaboration doc they had wasn't related to their learning journals, but they could draw upon it, so it was more their
it was actually a journey that they were taking across the semester, and they were doing those team exercises each week and discussions as well on that space, so it was pretty much like a learning sort of monograph that was there, and you can go back and read it and say, okay, that's what we were doing that week.
Cool. All right, let's quickly move on, so we're quite keen to have some discussion if possible. So let's go, I'll start this one here. This is some of their ideas. Student feedback. So we had, we don't want to dwell on this too much, but we were very fortunate to have 100% satisfaction with the quality of the course, 100% satisfaction with it being intellectually stimulating, clearly informed of how they would be assessed. and how it helped them develop their thinking skills and framing and inquiry. So obviously delighted with that result from the formal university evaluation framework with a 52% response rate. It's not too bad given that they have how many of these per semester. What we're more interested in was the more targeted feedback, and we have written a report on this. As I said at the outset, we wanted to gather feedback on the specific innovations. So we asked several different surveys throughout the semester. Most of the feedback here is from the week 12 survey, so at the end of the course. We wanted to ask them what we wanted to promise at the outset, which was, is the course practical, relevant to the real world, and exciting? In the introduction we said, look, we think pretty confidently that the course is practical and relevant to the real world. We don't know if it's exciting because we're not the students, so why don't you tell us in 12 weeks' time? So we're lucky to see that there was 98% and 93% respectively to say that it met the requirements of what we were asked to do at the outset of the course design. We found that they really enjoyed developing their own business or social enterprise ideas, with 100% of them saying that was a good idea. Condensing the academic content into 5 weeks rather than 8, was that helpful to their learning? Then 93% of them said that it was, again, given the cohort that we have. Anchoring team exercises and linking the academic content to the business on campus, they thought was also a good idea. And then they even enjoyed some of the assessment as well. So did they like the learning journals? 86% of them said they did. That surprised us because it's the type of writing they probably hadn't done much before, but they found that it was useful to their learning. The assessments, assessing individuals during the team presentation, which we thought was a risk, they also thought was fair and helpful to their learning. They liked the idea of consolidating all of their 9 weeks of work into their report. Week 10 to be a good idea. And they really, really liked the fact that we had an exam based upon a real-life business, which was written specifically for them, and some other positive comments there about some of the delivery style as well. So I think that's as much as we should say. We've got about 30 other slides of data and information. So we want to have slides, just in case we get some tricky questions, but we're happy to share the slides with you. It's essentially a report. In
a slide format.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you have any questions, yes.
It's a general one anyway. Like a lot of thought went into the need for a course like this. So we know that 20 years ago, students did anything related to business in school, a bit of accounting, a bit of economics, and now the schools have really upped their game. But we also knew that it was a challenge. You couldn't let them skip, because you might argue they should skip Business 101, you know, and then join the 102, so somehow speed up their journey. But the first course is so much about transitioning them to university and welcoming them all that we didn't want them to miss that experience. So that's why it's in the second course, which is kind of weird. But the question I've got is, it's still a diverse range of schools they come from, and I'm sure some are doing business quite well and some aren't. I know a lot of the schools really focus on the entrepreneurship angle, so the new business creation sort of thing. Is there anything that surprised you? And you may not have picked it up, but were there things that surprised you about what they knew or didn't know? Like when you compress those topics in 102, were there some that were problematic, they were completely new to them?
No, I think their preparedness was far better than
you
expected.
That's interesting.
And I kept saying to Andrew that we could have they wanted us to, and we could have pushed them a bit harder than we did, and they would have stood up to that challenge pretty much. So this constant having to think about, let's not do more than what's required at 102, kind of sort of held us back, but they wanted to go to the next stage, and we could have taken them there. But we were held back because we had to stick to what was required.
I think that we weren't really held back, but in terms of the assessment.
Oh, you said you'll be fair, right?
Yeah, so it was really important that, so we could have pushed them harder with the assessment, but it wouldn't have been fair to do so because they're essentially doing a different variant of 102.
Yeah.
One thing that surprised me, I think, was the real split between the social enterprise ideas and the business-oriented ideas.
Some of them were uncomfortable with the idea of having to start a business for making money.
Yes, we had to change
they wanted to do, and so we let them.
We had to change the instructions. We had to say the word business out quite a lot and change it to enterprise,
I think
which we thought was great.
I think in stream 1 we had one team that kind of said, I don't know, I'm in this team because I know all of them. I don't want to do for-profit type work. But that team is a smaller team, they're doing social enterprise. Can I join the two of them? Can I join them? And I said, yeah, it's up to you. So they walked over to the social enterprise work rather than having to sit with people that they knew who were going to about to make money.
Yeah.
Yes, Peter, please.
So I have several questions, so you can just stop me when I've hit too many. How did they opt in or were selected to this? So in other words, if they had studied business at college, they were automatically eligible for this, or how was that done?
Yeah, so that's a question I think Doug can answer.
Doug will
Yeah, so it's quite complicated. We had to go through a process of trying to figure out what they'd had at school. And then since we were giving them an advanced track in the second course, we wanted to see how well they performed in the first course, Business 101. So it wasn't like an honors program or anything, but they had to have done okay in the first course before we let them in. So it's a combination of have they been exposed to business studies at schools, which you can see from their entry standards, plus how well they performed in 101.
Now, some might have done something like the Young Enterprise Scheme.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was that weighed in?
Well, no, because we didn't have that information.
Okay.
But I think the majority of schools who do business do that.
Sure, but you don't really know who did
but
what.
you don't know,
Okay.
no.
And then you mentioned the design thinking. You said the first 3 bits, so I'm assuming up through the ideation step, yeah? Did you literally use the framework, like, the Stanford hexagon deal, or you just used the concepts?
The first 3 bits of the hexagon we used.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they were allowed, we literally walked in with sticky notes and pens and paper, and they were given a big whiteboard in which initial conversation happens, and then ideas start coming in onto those sticky notes that they can put up, and they take a picture of that, and then they reorganize them, they delete the ones that they don't make sense, the ones that do, and then they had to vote on which idea is a clever idea for today, we might change next week.
Yeah, they did.
So they had to do that 3 times, and then they started to figure out, okay, so we love everything, but there's one idea that we love the most. We're going to work on this now, which is the first 3 stages of ideation process.
Just a quick point of that, it's great co-teaching with someone from a different discipline, because I didn't know anything about that until last year. So it's really good to have Milind involved to lead that process. I think Barbara's got a quick question and we come back to you.
Yeah, sure.
One point to start with, we're using design thinking and ideation in postgraduate, so well done for bringing that in so early. The other thing is this is great, and I love what you're doing. I'm excited that I'm going to get these students in my 3rd year management papers later on, because they're going to have some great skills, so we can really work with that. I will ask you one question though, that you pulled back from using terms like critically analyse in favour of more simplistic language, what they are going to hit later on. So I wonder why, because they seem very capable.
That's a fair point. So we did use that in person in terms of the written form and the instructions. We didn't want it to, like we said, we didn't want things to be kind of prima facie, kind of overwhelming. So we wanted to use kind of clearer language. So when we wrote down the instructions, but when we actually said in class, hey, and when we failed to mention, we also came up with virtual tutorials as well. So we recorded a screen capture and we said, you're essentially critically analysing this. You're essentially taking a critical lens and exploring, challenging your assumptions and looking at this. So, no, it's a very fair point. Well, we just don't want to scare them off straight away.
That.
Yeah, especially given that they've never had a learning journal before. That's more for the reflective stuff. But they will also ask to critique it. So, yeah, hopefully that answers the question. But
yeah, it does.
I can hand on heart say we did get them to do it.
Yeah.
We're kind of nicer about the framing.
And a slightly add on to that, when you did the reflective work, did you differentiate between being reflective and reflexive, or did you just stick with reflective?
Reflective, yeah. We mentioned the likes of Dordalin's stages of reflection. We probably would have mentioned Kolb's experiential.
We had it in the slide that we took it out.
Yeah, I just wondered.
So just
how far you went with that as well.
Yeah, they weren't assessed on it, but we knew that we could be influenced by that.
But sounds like you were actually pushing them towards some quite reflexive learning.
What we were telling them that for everything that we're doing, it's not us. There's a framework there, which has been widely publicized and it's been researched on, and we ask you to do things that are done this way, but without having to be saying you must do it this way. Leave it open. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we've got some questions. Everyone's signaling that to me, so are you able to show us some questions from the audience?
There's one question from Zoom from Kathy. She says, thank you for sharing this fascinating innovation. And her question is, how do you manage the teams? One of the frequently mentioned areas in student feedback is fairness in team roles and member contributions. How are the Business 103 students finding these aspects? And have you had any team management mechanism in place?
Funny enough, they were so motivated that we actually did not have to intervene a lot. There was one team, I remember from stream number 1, which had a bit of an issue. There was one person who was taking over, and others were feeling slightly, my idea is a good idea as well. Why does it have to be his idea all the time? So I took them under my wing for a couple of weeks, and I sat through their meetings, and I made sure that everybody understood that everyone's voice is important, not just one person. And they still had to, and then the consequence of that was they were not deciding on what idea to take further. I kind of guided them, coached them to pick one idea, and then they had to work with that. So, but barring that, we did not have any.
There was no actual, I guess, control measures. But we did say, hey, there will be a voluntary peer review at the end of the semester if we've missed anything. So we have some discretion to change marks, but it transpired that we didn't have to do that.
It's a completely, it surprised us because that whole team was completely different. They were so driven and motivated.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.